Hey, Chris Salvatore here to talk about movie release windows. First, some historical context to create some understanding of how we got to where we are now. In the early years of the movie industry, as many revolutionary changes as were taking place, there was only the theatrical release to generate revenue for the film. Once it was out of theaters, there was no way for the studio that financed, distributed, and exhibited the movie to make money. Don't cry for them though, they were making tons of cash on the theatrical release alone. That all changed in the 1950s. When the television became a staple of the American home, the movie studios did what most entities do when threatened. They dismissed it, then they freaked out, tried to stop it, and then embraced it. Eventually, they realized that the television stations needed content. Yes, that word existed even then. And the studios started to license their movies to television, and they were thrilled, and a new post release business was born for film. The post theatrical release boom hit its stride in the 80s when video became prevalent. Between renting and purchasing videos at what were called brick and mortar places like Blockbuster, as well as the growth of cable television, studios found a huge source of revenue, which was a positive to everyone but the theater owners. They became increasingly worried that the growing popularity of video would lead people to skip movies in the theater. So a quote unquote theatrical window was negotiated between the studios and the theaters to mitigate that concern. And so everyone was happy. The happiness continued and even grew in the 1990s. The theatrical window held at around 4 months for the theaters. The DVD market was incredibly lucrative, both rentals through brick and mortar and what were called sell-through purchases at places like Walmart and Target. So much so that the studios were able to make very optimistic projections when budgeting and greenlighting a film. In fact, I remember being a wide-eyed junior executive in some of these meetings and thinking, really, we're going to make it for that much? But it was considered good business and the returns were good. Then in the 2000s, the market softened dramatically and the studios started to freak out. A reliable source of revenue was drying up. So, for more than a decade, there has been tension between the studios and theater owners slash exhibitors. Studios are trying to figure out how to make up that lost revenue of DVDs. The good news is that the digital post-release revenue is on the upswing, but not to the level where studios need it to be. As a result, the theatrical window that has existed since the 80s is under serious threat, and things are not quite so happy. So here's what the current window pattern looks like now. Let's zoom into each window to take a more detailed look. Here's theatrical release, the first window. I believe the official number is 16.5 weeks, but essentially the theater owners have the right to hold a movie in theaters for at least 4 months, and then it moves to the next window, which is a little more complex. As my daughter would say, bam, what? Now, if this seems confusing, I don't blame you. It actually took some time and research for me to really get it to the extent that I do. DVD is somewhat self-explanatory. Now, let's look at the yellow post-its for a minute. If we're talking iTunes, it's to rent or purchase, which would be considered video on demand. If it's Amazon, it's to rent or purchase, not stream. And if it's Netflix, it's you're able to order the DVD but not stream it. So streaming is considered SVOD, and that's in the next window. So we'll touch on that in the next window. And keep Netflix in mind for later because there are some issues, interesting issues with them. Okay, let's zoom in to get some definitions here. VOD stands for video on demand. I actually went into a writing contract to get actual legal definitions for some of these terms. Video on demand shall mean the method of exhibition of the picture in which the viewing consumer has the ability to select the time and day of the exhibition of the picture, and the picture is then transmitted to the viewing consumer. So with VOD, you're not buying the movie to own permanently. You can get video on demand on cable or satellite system. It could also be iTunes download to rent but not to own, Amazon download to rent but not to own. Owning is actually considered part of the next term, which is electronic sell-through, or EST. Some key phrases here: electronic sell-through, permanent data retention for subsequent unlimited replay. So essentially, you're purchasing the movie permanently, like buying a DVD, but you're storing it digitally somewhere, most obviously in your iTunes library or your Amazon cloud. But there are also other methods of storing, such as digital lockers. So let's move to the next window. Pay television, which is a lot simpler. You've got cable television and satellite television. And here's where streaming comes into play. So SVOD stands for Subscription Video on Demand. So Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, etc. Then the next window, broadcast or free television. That's pretty simple. Now, as we can see from the timeline, the whole process, all of these windows, tends to take about 2 years. It's different with different movies, but that's about the average. Now, as I mentioned before, the theatrical window is under threat. Studios want to experiment with other ways for people to see their movies earlier, and the theater owners are staunchly fighting back. For instance, a couple of years ago, Universal announced that it was going to offer Tower Heist, Ben Stiller, Eddie Murphy, etc., to a couple of cities for a premium VOD offering 3 weeks after its initial theatrical release. But theater owners protested so vehemently that they scrapped the plan. But the studios aren't, interestingly, the only threat to the theatrical window. As I mentioned before, Netflix really wants to be able to stream movies in the second window, so streaming in the DVD, VOD, EST window, or even during the theatrical release. They believe that it fits with giving consumers what they want and won't detract from theatrical, which is easy for them to say. But the theater owners refuse to take that risk, leading to some tension. Okay, so the takeaways from all this craziness. In the 1950s, television created a way for movies to make money post-theatrical release. In the 1980s, the video boom created a tremendous source of revenue for the post-theatrical release. A theatrical window was established to protect the interests of the theater owners and try to ensure that people actually go to the movie theaters. In the 1990s, there was a very healthy DVD market, but then in the 2000s, that market eroded, and the theatrical window has been under threat ever since. Okay, various windows of release for a film. There's theatrical, which is 4 months approximately. Then DVD, VOD, EST, video on demand, electronic sell-through. Then pay TV/streaming, subscription video on demand. And then broadcast free TV. Thanks for tuning in, and look for more videos.